So what I want to do here is have a conversation about the original Wally West. And what I'm hoping is that at the end of all this, you'll have a strong understanding of his character, as well as why fans prefer this version to the one seen in the New 52. So Wally West first appears in DC Comics with The Flash Volume 1, issue number 110 in 1959, and was created by John Broome and Carmine Infantino. Considered to be the one true version of Wally West as opposed to his New 52 counterpart, the love that fans have for Wally is the result of his involvement in the Flash series and the expansion of the mythos during his time as the title character. Coming out of DC's success with Dick Grayson as Robin in 1940, coupled with the introduction of several more sidekicks in the form of Roy Harper from the Green Arrow series and Bucky Barnes from Marvel's Captain America, the desire of DC at the time was to introduce a counterpart to the Flash comics in a way that would help to boost sales and drive interest from younger readers. However, with the Flash series incorporating multiple stories confined within a single issue, because DC was hesitant to see Wally introduced to readers who would reject the idea of a sidekick, instead, the introduction of Wally came as a backup feature in issue number 110, titled Meet Kid Flash. Now, in his first appearance, Wally's brought before Barry by Iris West, with the story actually taking place before Iris becomes aware of the fact that Barry is the Flash. Instead, Iris is under the impression that the two are close friends, and because Wally is the president of the Blue Valley Flash fan club, Iris hopes that Barry will introduce the two and grant Wally's wish. With Iris departing and allowing the two to spend time together, Barry sends Wally to his laboratory under the guise that he'll get a chance to meet the Flash. Taking the momentary distraction to change into his signature uniform and race to the room before Wally can enter, Barry greets him as the Flash and even goes as far as to show Wally how he gained his abilities. However, the fun and games go awry when Wally is exposed to the chemical combinations and struck by lightning in the same exact fashion as Barry. Now, where this stretches credulity at best and is clearly written for the sake of simply turning Wally into the Flash, something to remember here is that during the 1950s, readers focused less on the how and why when it came to heroes gaining their powers. Because this was during the early days of the Silver Age and the resurgence of interest in comics, the concern of both fans and DC itself was more on the order of cranking out new heroes and simply seeing what became popular. And so after performing a couple of experiments and testing the speed of Wally, because he seems for all intents and purposes to be identical in power to Barry, Wally's provided a red Flash costume similar to Barry's and given the name Kid Flash. Now, for those of you who are new to my channel, when I first started producing content, one of the things that I had said was that if I didn't know something, I would always be upfront and simply say that I don't know. In this instance, regarding Wally's publication history after his introduction, I don't really know anything about his stories. I know that at some point his costume changed to a yellow and red design, and I believe he was a member of the Teen Titans, but again, if I can't verify something in a comic book, I don't consider it to be true. And because I can't locate comics based on these stories, I'm not going to espouse them as absolute fact. Instead, what we're going to do here is we're going to jump forward to Crisis on Infinite Earths, and Wally West replacing Barry Allen as the Flash. So by 1985, the stories of Barry Allen had been struggling financially, and that while he continued to be a relatively popular character, in terms of sales, he'd been lagging behind Superman, Batman, and others for quite some time. Where the decline wasn't large enough for DC to drop the Flash series entirely, it was enough to raise a few eyebrows. In addition to this, by the time Crisis on Infinite Earths came around, the Flash reader base was largely composed of Wally West fans, who had quite literally grown up with the character. As a result, it seemed to be a natural progression for Barry to move beyond the Flash character and for Wally to undertake his mantle in his place. To this end, when Marv Wolfman and DC had launched Crisis on Infinite Earths in an effort to correct the continuity issues that existed following the advent of the multiverse with Flash of Two Worlds, the reboot was used as a catch-all to effectively kill off Barry Allen and set the stage for Wally. In issue number 8, after making a series of sporadic appearances in the story from a state of captivity, Barry had broken free of his prison at the hands of the Anti-Monitor and began the process of attempting to dismantle the antimatter cannon, which would have been used to wipe out all life in existence. Where Barry was successful in dispersing the antimatter energies and sparing a handful of universes from guaranteed destruction, the manner in which he died with his essence simply fading away to nothingness was an indication by Wolfman that not only was Barry gone, but that there had been no plans by DC to bring him back. Using this as a jumping off platform, at the conclusion of the series with the Anti-Monitor defeated, DC had Wally step out of the Kid Flash persona and into the main Flash role by adopting the mantle in honor of Barry's sacrifice. So following Crisis on Infinite Earths and Wally West officially becoming the Flash, the title was relaunched as Volume 2 in the form of a monthly series under writer Mike Baron and artist Larry Malstedt, where Mike Baron had only stayed on for about 14 issues as he was switched over to Marvel to write for the Punisher. Within the first 2 issues, Baron had written a story involving Vandal Savage attempting to hunt down Wally. As a Golden Age villain dating back to 1943 and an enemy of the original Alan Scott, when DC had created the multiverse, Vandal Savage crossed over into the main continuity and became an enemy of the Earth 1 Justice League as well. However, when Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, rather than having his continuity reset, Vandal Savage was continued on as if nothing had happened and instead became an enemy of Wally with the intention of killing him along with the rest of the Justice League. While this attempt was unsuccessful, the purpose of this story was to establish that Wally was a credible threat to villains in DC Comics rather than being a publicity stunt. Furthermore, in issue number 1, Mike Baron had sought to move Wally away from the life of struggling financially and instead become an overnight millionaire after winning the lottery. Using this to create a subplot of Wally attempting to cope with his new level of financial success coupled with Savage hunting him down and his efforts in becoming a hero, Baron was also faced with the fact that there were still a multitude of Barry Allen fans who had stayed on board even after his death in Crisis on Infinite Earths. In an effort to ensure that those fans weren't alienated but to also keep new fans appeased, Baron established that Wally's powers regarding his speed were still formidable, but that he was a less powerful version of Barry. In this sense, Wally was able to run faster than the speed of sound, but he wasn't able to move faster than the speed of light, and instead of functioning as a normal human with super speed, he had to consume massive quantities of food in order to keep his body from literally consuming itself for energy. Where these stories under Baron followed the theme of comics at the time and focusing on more realistic character-driven content as opposed to the lighthearted content seen pre-Crisis, fans found that this version of Wally was difficult to keep up with and that Baron seemed to be throwing out too much too fast in an effort to keep interest. And so following his departure with issue number 14 in 1988, the series came under the control of William Messner Loebs, who wrote for the series until issue number 61. Where Baron had left the series with plot threads involving the loss of his powers and his relationship with Tina McGee, a scientist who had been married to Jerry McGee and gained a grant from Harvard University to study the metabolism of Wally, where Baron had Jerry become a villain named Speed Demon by way of a chemical called Compound 19 in an effort to provide Wally with his own signature villain, fans had largely rejected the idea, and within a couple of issues, Baron wrote Jerry into a coma following a battle with Wally. However, because the plot thread of Tina and Wally engaging in a relationship was left hanging when Messner Loebs took over the series, he revived Jerry, restored his sanity, and put him back together with Tina, removing her as a love interest for Wally. During this time, and with DC relaunching the Justice League post-Crisis as an international team focused on worldwide conflicts, because Wally stood in a kind of middle ground regarding his popularity among older fans and potential popularity with newer readers, under Keith Griffin and J.M. DeMatteis, Wally was rolled over into the new Justice League branch-off group titled Justice League Europe in an effort to boost the popularity of its initial launch, but also expose Wally to existing readers who were otherwise unsure about his character. Proving itself to be a success in that Wally became the standout star of the series, Justice League Europe helped to fuel the fire of his popularity, which in turn bolstered the sales of his solo comic. In addition to this, for many fans, it wasn't until around a year into his 4-year run that Loebs had come into his own with the Flash stories, and that by issue number 28, Messner Loebs had introduced Linda Park, and in issue number 32, Wally was moved to Keystone City. Arguably considered to be two of the most important aspects of his character, the placement of Wally in Keystone allowed for Messner Loebs to begin the process of removing him from the shadow of Barry, and the introduction of Linda set the stage for a future love interest and marriage between the two. However, when Loebs departed the series in 1992 with issue number 61, the title was handed over to Mark Waid, who's considered to be the landmark writer for Wally West. As a relatively new writer at the time with several titles under his belt including Legion of Superheroes, Doom Patrol, and Wonder Woman, in 1987 Mark Waid had established a strong name for himself after working alongside Brian Augustine with Gotham by Gaslight, which went on to establish the DC Elseworlds line of comics. As a result, Augustine had hired Waid on to take over and continue the series. However, the mishmash of plot threads from Baron and Loebs had created a veritable nightmare for newer readers who looked to get into the series, and so the intention of Waid was to effectively start anew and essentially relaunch the Flash series by introducing new themes and create a self-contained universe that expanded on the existing content. And to this end, with issues 74 through 79, Mark Waid introduced a 6-part series titled The Return of Barry Allen, which introduced the post-crisis Eobard Thawne. Because we've covered this character several times on this channel, there's really no reason for us to do it again, but the purpose of this story was to see the return of Eobard Thawne, but also move Wally into his own. What I mean here is that in the eyes of Mark Waid and Flash fans as a whole, if Wally was going to be the star of the story, he needed to be treated that way within both the DC Universe and DC Comics as a whole. As a result, at the conclusion of the story and with Thawne and Wally engaging in a battle, it was revealed that Wally had the potential to be a more powerful version of the Flash than Barry was, but that he had simply been holding himself back out of fear of offending Barry's legacy. Using this new standard of Wally's powers and that like Barry he could now travel through solid objects by vibrating and is occasionally able to exceed the speed of light, With issues number 92 and 96, Waid introduced Bart Allen as a descendant of the Allen family line from the 30th century, and Jessie Quick, the daughter of Golden Age speedster Johnny Quick and Golden Age heroine Liberty Bell. Following up in issues 97 through 100 with a story titled Terminal Velocity, Waid brought together and reconciled the powers of Max Mercury, Wally West, Johnny Quick, Jessie Quick, Bart Allen, and Jay Garrick by establishing that their ability to move at super speed was rooted in a concept called the Speed Force. As a singular source of energy existing outside of the multiverse and uniting all speedsters under its power, the introduction of the Speed Force came by way of Max Mercury, who was established to have previously been part of the US frontier and a friend to a local Native American tribe. However, when the tribe was ambushed by the militia, Mercury was bestowed with the ability to move at super speed, allowing him to avenge the Native Americans. Following this, and while using his superpower, Mercury had constantly bumped up against an invisible barrier which he couldn't penetrate, but emanated a vast amount of energy. Attempting to pass through it but failing each time, every attempt of Max to enter the Speed Force came with a jump into the future, which was used to explain how he had survived from the 19th century to the current day. And so as the final piece of the puzzle, and in an effort to make Wally a standalone character, issue number 99 saw Linda Park attacked at the hands of a villain named Cobra. Coming to her aid and moving faster than he ever had, where Wally saved Linda's life, he also vibrated at the right frequency, allowing him to enter the Speed Force. Using this as a jumping off platform, Waid went forward into the rest of his run, establishing that unlike Barry Allen and the rest of the speedsters who tapped into the Speed Force when they used their powers, instead, Wally had effectively become part of the Speed Force, which enhanced his existing abilities, making him faster and more powerful than Barry Allen. As a result, fans were ecstatic to see Wally officially moving out of the shadow of Barry and into his own role as the top Flash of the time. Now, where Wally had found success within the pages of his own comic, the drive of DC at the time was to forge alliances between Wally and newer heroes who were cropping up and replacing some of the older characters. With Hal Jordan vacating his position as the Green Lantern after eliminating the Corps and killing off the Guardians of the Universe during the events of Emerald Twilight and Zero Hour, DC looked to establish legitimacy for the newly created Kyle Rayner by having him become friends with Wally. While the early meetings between the two were tense in that Wally had quite literally grown into a superhero and looked up to Hal as a role model following the death of Barry, Wally and Kyle grew to become close friends, with DC introducing several one-shot team-ups between the two which served to bolster their popularity among fans. Now, where Waid's 8-year run ended in 2000 with issue number 162, by issue number 164, fledgling writer Geoff Johns was brought on board to take over the title due to his critically acclaimed work on the newly reinstated Justice Society of America from 1999, where Johns continued many of the trends that made Wally popular under Waid, in that he maintained his ability to move faster than Barry on occasion, as well as his connection to the Speed Force. Johns also sought to expand on the existing mythos and the life of Wally. To this end, in Flash issues 197 through 200 during a story called Blitz, Geoff Johns introduced the possibility of Wally and Linda having children. Where issue number 198 saw Hunter Zolomon attacking Linda and causing a miscarriage, the comic ended with Wally and Zolomon battling one another, and Wally coming out on top. But because the comic was released as a monthly series, this allowed for Johns and DC to determine fan feedback regarding the idea and move forward accordingly. With the company receiving a slew of letters from fans requesting to see Wally's family grow, following the conclusion of the Blitz storyline with Linda's miscarriage and going into issue number 225, Zolomon had returned to fight Wally. With their battle raging across the timescape, its conclusion saw Wally throwing Zolomon in the way of his past self during his attack on Linda. The result was that Linda was spared the attack, and when time corrected itself, she was 9 months pregnant and giving birth. However, with Infinite Crisis launching in 2006 as a way for DC to cope with lingering continuity issues from Crisis on Infinite Earths, the company looked to use the opportunity as a way to experiment with a replacement for Wally West as a new Flash. And so, using the actions of Max Mercury, Johnny Quick, Bart Allen, and Wally West trapping Superboy Prime in the Speed Force as a platform, DC segued into sending Linda Park, Wally, Jai, and Iris into a parallel Earth, leaving Bart as the main Flash on New Earth. Launching a year-long series called Flash, the Fastest Man Alive, the goal of having Bart Allen replace Wally turned out to be a dismal failure, with both fan write-ins and slumping sales demanding the return of Wally. As a result, Wally was brought back as the main star of the title, along with Linda, Jai, and Iris. But despite the success of most of his stories, including Wally's focus on solving the problem of Jai and Iris's rapid aging, it was no secret that Johns preferred the characters of years past and the era they represented. Where fans loved the work that Johns was putting in during his run regarding the Rogues, a group of Flash villains who came together in their attempts to defeat him, as well as the creation of Hunter Zolomon, the third person to undertake the Reverse Flash mantle, by issue number 226, Johns had left the Flash title and was replaced by a series of interim writers, including Stuart Immonen, Joey Cavalieri, in addition to the return of Mark Waid. where these stories maintained their popularity as they continued fan-favorite themes but also coincided with Wally West's appearances in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited between 2001 and 2006. By 2009, Johns had developed enough clout within DC to organize and see the return of Barry Allen to the Flash landscape. Where Barry's initial return came during Grant Morrison's 2008 event Final Crisis, centering on Darkseid's attempt to overthrow reality using the anti-life equation, at its conclusion, Johns followed up with the story Flash Rebirth, which followed Barry adapting to his life among the living. Where the story largely focused on retconning Barry's history in relation to Eobard Thawne and the various tragedies of Barry's life, for many DC fans, the writing was on the wall regarding Wally West and that while he wasn't quite out of the game, he was certainly being handed his hat. And so the concern of DC fans ultimately came to fruition during 2011's Flashpoint storyline, leading into the launch of New 52, with Wally West, Iris, Jai, and Linda all being wiped from the Flash continuity and Barry Allen standing as the only version of the character. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.